Start. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes rook, check. Bishop takes bishop, check. Bishop takes pawn. Rook takes knight, check. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen to d7, check. Queen takes rook, check. Queen to e5, check. Queen to g5, check. Bishop takes bishop, check. Bishop to g5, check. Rook takes knight, check. Answer to this puzzle is rook takes knight, check. Bishop takes rook. Bishop takes bishop, check. King takes bishop. Queen takes rook. Let's see the next puzzle. The threats are. There are no threats in this position. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen to f8, check. Queen to g7, check. Queen to h7, check. Queen to g5, check. Queen to h4, check. Queen to e3, check. The answer is Queen to h4, check. King to g7. Queen to e7, check. Another puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Rook takes pawn. Rook takes rook. Queen takes rook. There are no checks in this position. The answer is Queen takes rook. Queen takes queen, check. Rook takes queen. Another puzzle. Threats in this position are. Queen takes queen, check. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. The checks are. Queen to b7, check. Queen to a8, check. Queen takes queen, check. Queen to d7, check. Queen to e8, check. Queen to e6, check. Queen to a6, check. Rook to e8, check. Answer to this puzzle is rook to e8, check. Rook takes rook. Queen takes rook, check. Queen to d8. Queen takes rook. Let's continue. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Rook takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. Here is the solution to the puzzle. d5. Pawn takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. Bishop to b5. a4. Next puzzle. Threats in this position are. Rook takes rook, check. Queen takes queen, check. Queen takes bishop. Queen takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. The checks are. Rook takes rook, check. Queen takes queen, check. Solution to the puzzle is. Rook takes rook, check. King takes rook. Bishop to c6, check. Bishop to d7. Queen to b8, check. Queen to d8. Bishop takes bishop, check. Let us go to the next puzzle. Threats in this position are. Queen takes rook. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes knight. The checks are. Queen takes pawn, check. The answer is. Bishop to b7. Knight to e6, check. King to e7. Knight takes rook. King takes knight. Rook to d6, check. Queen takes rook. Let's continue. The threats are. Bishop takes rook. King takes bishop. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using. Bishop takes rook. Knight to c6, check. King takes bishop. Knight takes rook. King to d4. Next puzzle. Threats in puzzle position are. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes bishop. There are no checks in this position. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Knight takes bishop. Rook takes rook. Bishop takes rook. Rook takes pawn. Bishop takes bishop. Another one. Threats in puzzle position are. Knight takes pawn. Rook takes rook. Queen takes knight, check. Queen takes rook. Checks in puzzle position are. Queen takes knight, check. The puzzle is solved using. Queen to g3. Queen to c2. Queen takes pawn, check. King to g1. Knight to f3, check. King to f2. Knight to d4. Let's see the next puzzle. Here are the threats. Knight takes bishop. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn, check. Knight takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes queen. Pawn takes pawn. Rook takes knight. The checks are. Knight takes pawn, check. Knight takes pawn, check. Knight to h7, check. Knight to h3, check. Knight to f3, check. Knight to e4, check. Bishop to h7, check. The answer is. Bishop to h7, check. King to h8. Knight takes pawn, check. King takes bishop. Queen to g6, checkmate. Next, let us look at threats in puzzle position. King takes knight. Rook takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. Answer to this puzzle is e2. Rook to e1. f3. Pawn takes rook. f2. Let us go to the next puzzle. The threats are queen takes pawn, check. Bishop takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. Here are checks in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn, check. Knight to f5, check. Knight to g6, check. Knight to d5, check. Answer to this puzzle is knight to f5, check. Pawn takes knight. Knight to d5, check. Next, threats in this position are there are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. The best move in puzzle position is rook to e7. Queen to b2. Queen takes pawn. Let's see the next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Knight takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Knight to d6, check. Knight takes pawn, check. Queen to a4, check. Queen to h5, check. The puzzle is solved using queen to h5, check. g6. Queen to b5, check. King to f7. Queen takes bishop. Let us go to the next puzzle. Threats in puzzle position are queen takes pawn. Queen takes rook. Bishop takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. Solution to the puzzle is rook to b1. Queen to d2. Rook to b2. Let's see the next puzzle. The threats are bishop takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Bishop to e7, check. Bishop to f4, check. Queen to c5, check. Queen to c6, check. Queen to c7, check. Queen to b4, check. e5, check. The best move in puzzle position is bishop to g8. Queen to a5. Bishop to f4, check. Bishop to e5. Before. Rook takes bishop. Pawn takes queen. Let us go to the next puzzle. The threats are rook takes queen. Rook takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes bishop, check. Queen takes rook. The checks are queen takes pawn, check. Queen to f2, check. Queen takes bishop, check. Queen to e3, check. The best move in puzzle position is rook takes queen. Promotes to queen, check. Queen takes queen. Next, threats in this position are king takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. The best move in puzzle position is king takes pawn. f5. g5. f4. g6. Next, here are threats in puzzle position. There are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using knight to c6. b5. Knight to d4, check. King to f6. Knight takes pawn. Another puzzle. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are knight takes knight. Rook takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen to f3, check. Queen to d1, check. The answer is queen to f3, check. King to g1. Rook to g8, check. King to f1. Queen takes pawn, check. King to e1. Rook to g1, checkmate. Next, the threats are pawn takes pawn. Checks in this position are queen to h2, check. Queen to e1, check. Queen to a1, check. The puzzle is solved using pawn takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. Queen to a1, check. King to h2. Queen takes pawn. One more. The threats are queen takes knight. Pawn takes rook. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using pawn takes rook. Rook to d2. Rook to b5. Rook takes rook. Rook takes rook. Next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Rook takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. King takes knight. The checks are rook to d8, check. Rook takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Solution to the puzzle is king takes knight. Queen to g1, check. King to d2. Another puzzle. Threats in this position are bishop takes pawn. Queen takes knight. Knight takes bishop. Checks in puzzle position are knight to f3, check. Knight to e2, check. Answer to this puzzle is knight takes bishop. Queen takes knight. Rook to f5. Queen to g6. Rook takes knight. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.